Hi, everyone. Happy Sunday, and thank you for joining me on another episode of The Chamber Within. This week, I'd like to discuss what loving yourself means and the benefits that it has on those around you. When I was a young girl, I was raised as a Baptist. However, in New York City, growing up, in order to get a decent education, this meant that your parents had to pay for you, lest you go to public school like everyone else. So the problem is that since I was raised in the South Bronx in the 80s during that time, the public school system left much to be desired by way of high level curriculum. So I attended a Catholic school out of safety and concern for my parents. They figured if they were paying for school, I should be able to have a fighting chance at life, even though we weren't Catholics ourselves. Anyway, I do remember, I'll never forget, sitting in religion class. I think it was about first or second grade. We were going over the Ten Commandments, and as we were all reciting them as a class, I was looking down my notebook paper at this list, and I just couldn't get past the love thy neighbor as thyself commandment. I kept thinking to myself, as I love myself, what does that even mean? I was a child, first and second grade, so I couldn't understand how one could love themselves. I skipped past the lesson. It was something that I wasn't taught how to love myself. How could they just glaze over that? Other people, other things, yes. I get the loving the external world about you, but to love yourself seemed to be laying it on a bit thick. It seemed impossible. How could I do that? Years later, when I was 39 years old, just before my spiritual awakening, I said out loud to myself, if finally learning to love myself is my only lesson in life, then so be it. I'll be happy to finally learn how to do that because it seems there's a great set of repercussions if we don't learn this lesson early on in life. So I'm here because I want to discuss all of the things or lessons, I should say, I've learned between that time that I was in class up until I was about 40 years old. The actual importance of loving oneself. So, one lesson I learned is that loving yourself means speaking kindly to yourself and being aware of how dangerous self talk can be. When you learn to speak kindly to yourself, you inherently learn to speak kindly of others. Another lesson I learned is that giving yourself grace and understanding is a way to self soothe and recalibrate after a tough day or extended period of time. Being okay with not always knowing the answer and making mistakes, knowing that we all learn in our own way, helped me greatly. Being on your own timeline. Another lesson is to not judge yourself so harshly. If you can master that, then you do not need to do it to others. Why is he or she wearing that? Why are they acting this way? I've learned through personal relationships that those who judge harshly are the same ones who judge themselves in the same way. They suffer in constant torment of themselves, their own ideas and thoughts. And it's a bit sad because when I hear them do it to others, I know that they are doing it to themselves. One person at work who I know is constantly judging others and they have them all figured out and summed up. And one day they admitted to me that they battle depression. They go home and go in their room. This is someone that is at work seemingly in charge and has everything all together and has a high level of responsibility. Another associate who was mean girling her coworker suffers from crippling anxiety because of how she is being perceived. Do you see what I mean? These ideas that you have or a way of being not only affects you, but it affects others around you. I also learned that when you can love yourself unconditionally, you can finally give this kind of love to others. As you heal others through intentions. How we see others and send loving vibrations their way is very important. I've said it before. You need not say anything. That's how powerful we are. Not through force, but understanding. Not through pity, but compassion for one another. Not through shoulds, like you should have done this or you should have done that, like I would have, but through patience. Not through constant lecturing, but listening and allowing others to come to their answers on their own. I do this with my family members, coworkers, friends. The realizations I have come to has allowed me to see myself in others. I won't stop saying it because it is the God honest truth, which was the biggest eye-opening realization for me. It's important to love yourself because you are home base, right? You are the starting point. And the best bit of information I have gained was that when you have come to a point where you know who you are, your vibration is unwavering. You can learn to stay centered and not be brought down to join another person's negative vibe, but in fact, you can lift them. You can learn to lift up others by your presence. Staying centered, being able to be in your peace and not be overtaken by what previously would have brought you to tears or brought you down or made you feel less than. This happens to those who do not know who they are. And for a long time, I didn't know who I was. Just as I was lifted in my time of sorrow, as I wrote on my Substack, how I was consoled by my spirit guides. And I also talked about this lifting in episode 2 entitled, This is a Blessing. We do it for each other, one another. Loving yourself is a way to make it through. And once you have mastered this, you not only stop hurting yourself, but you stop intentionally hurting others as well. I'd like to read a passage from the book of Love and Creation by Paul Selig. I've mentioned his name before because I have a lot of his books. He channels what are called the guides. In one of the books, or a couple of the books, I think, they mention that if you need a name, they go by the name Melchizedek. So this is from the book of Love and Creation. Creation and Awareness is the chapter, and this is day 8 on page 122. We'll talk about love first and issues that have precluded you from claiming your ownership and dominion as a lover. Now we have given you examples thus far in awareness about those things that present themselves in consciousness that serve as obstacles to your ability to perceive yourself as lovable. But we have not yet addressed your own resistance to standing in your love as the lover, as the one who benefits others through the responsibility and through the action of acting as love. This is important. When you are love incarnate, when you have manifested the self to the degree that we now say you are capable of and aligned to love, what you bring forth is the manifestation of love. And those that are with you, that are in your presence, will be activated frequency-wise in their vibration through this interaction. It cannot be otherwise. You are magnifying the frequency of love as embodied, and that impacts structures and energy frequency. It cannot not be so. Now, the relinquishing of control of who you thought you were until this time is part of the passage that you are undergoing. The ego has an investment in running the show still, and your fear that you will not be taken care of by the light, by the divine self that you truly are, is what is keeping you at bay from full manifestation. Now, it's not a simple thing. It's not like you're opening up a wad of bubble gum and there, underneath the paper, is the solution. This is much more complex because the systems that the ego has created to define herself as the one in charge have surmounted those things that you can identify with as your divine self. Quite simply, you cannot say, I am in my divine self. I am operating as love, without believing on a certain level that you are lying. Actually, as we have stated, the lie has always been that you are not this thing, that you are not a creature created in the image and likeness of God. That is the truth and essence of who you are. But if you can already experience the level of resistance that you have to claiming this in fullness, you can understand the identity structure that has been built so high to preclude you from seeing over the top of the wall of separation from yourself and from your God self, your divine self, the Christ itself, the creative self that you are in truth. We are seeing that the work of this text thus far has been to identify those things on a practical level that have been keeping you in unconsciousness of who you are. But we have not yet addressed completely your own desire to stay where you are and to stand in your unconsciousness and perpetuate the lie that you are not love or not an aspect of God or a willing emissary of the divine. I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for listening this week. Hopefully it has helped someone or allowed them permission to actually love themselves. It is not a selfish act. It's actually a very noble act, because when you do it for yourself, again, you do it for others. As I'm teaching my daughter how to love herself, since I was so confused about it as a child, and I think I figured it out, I figured I'd pass on the information to her as well, because hopefully she can make new mistakes and not the same mistakes that I made. But anyway, again, thanks for listening. You have a great week. Bye-bye.